He divorced his pregnant wife, let his mother call her a parasite and a gold digger, then threw dirty water on her in front of everyone while his mistress watched, smiled, and recorded them. What none of them knew. She was 72 hours away from signing a $10 billion deal that would destroy him, bankrupt his mother, and erase his mistress from existence forever. I'm about to show you what happens when a woman stops asking for respect and starts taking her power back. But first, I need to know you're ready for this. Subscribe if you want to watch 3 people get exactly what they deserve. Comment your time and where you're from if you've been waiting your whole life to see karma work perfectly. Because what's about to happen? You've never seen revenge this elegant. Hannah Caldwell grew up in Charlotte, where church bells rang every Sunday and grandmothers raised you with iron love and unshakable faith. Her grandmother used to say, "Baby, dignity ain't loud, but it doesn't break either." Hannah held on to those words like a lifeline through every storm life threw at her. She wasn't born into money or power, but she was born into something far more dangerous, brilliance wrapped in humility. By the time she turned 28, boardrooms whispered her name like a secret they didn't want competitors to hear. She could look at a failing blueprint and see a billion-dollar future where others saw rubble. Executives called her a miracle worker. Investors begged for her insights. Yet Hannah never bragged, never boasted, never demanded the spotlight. She credited her teams, deflected praise, and stayed humble. But make no mistake, that humility wasn't weakness. It was a weapon she didn't even realize she was sharpening. Then Mark Renner walked into her life at a tech conference in Atlanta, all charm and boyish grins, holding 2 cups of coffee like he'd been waiting for her all along. "You looked like you needed this more than I did," he said, handing her one. She laughed, surprised by his warmth. Mark wasn't like the cold, calculated men she usually met in her field. He seemed genuine, vulnerable even, like someone who actually saw her, and not just what she could build. They talked for hours that night about dreams, about legacy, about what it meant to create something that outlasted you. Hannah felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd found a partner who valued her mind as much as her heart. They started dating 2 weeks later, and within 6 months, Mark proposed on a rooftop under a sky full of stars he claimed he'd rented just for her. She said yes without hesitation, believing she'd finally found her equal. But love has a way of blinding you to shadows lurking in corners you don't think to check. And the biggest shadow in Mark's life had a name, Eleanor Renner. The first time Hannah met Mark's mother was at a private dinner in the Renner family estate, a massive structure that felt more like a museum than a home. Eleanor greeted her with a smile so tight it could crack glass. "So you're the woman my son can't stop talking about," Eleanor said, her eyes scanning Hannah from head to toe like she was calculating her worth by the thread count of her dress. Hannah felt the judgment but chose grace. "It's wonderful to finally meet you, Mrs. Renner. Mark speaks so highly of you." Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Does he now?" The entire evening felt like an exam Hannah didn't know she was taking. Eleanor asked pointed questions disguised as polite curiosity, where Hannah's family was from, what her father did for a living, whether she'd ever traveled to Europe. Every answer seemed to disappoint her a little more. When Hannah excused herself to take a work call, Eleanor leaned across the table and whispered to Mark, "She's not one of us. You see that, don't you?" Mark laughed nervously, brushing it off, but the seed was planted. And Eleanor Renner never planted seeds she didn't intend to water with poison. Over the following months, Eleanor's attacks became more surgical, more deliberate. She'd mention Lena Holloway at every family gathering. Lena, the heiress with old money and older connections, the kind of woman Eleanor believed belonged in the Renner family tree. "Lena asked about you the other day, Mark," Eleanor would say casually over brunch. "She's doing incredible work with her foundation. Such a remarkable young woman." Hannah would sit there, smiling politely, pretending not to notice the way Eleanor's words were designed to make her feel inadequate. And Lena, ever the perfect actress, played her role flawlessly. She'd touch Mark's arm a little too long, laugh a little too sweetly, send him thoughtful texts about business ideas she wanted his opinion on. To anyone watching, it looked innocent. But Hannah saw the strategy. She saw the way Lena positioned herself as everything Eleanor wanted and everything Hannah wasn't. Still, Hannah chose trust over suspicion. She believed in her marriage. She believed Mark loved her enough to see through the manipulation. But belief doesn't protect you when the man you love starts listening to the wrong voices. Mark began changing in ways so subtle Hannah convinced herself it was just stress from work. He stayed late at the office more often, came home quieter, looked at her like he was searching for something he couldn't find. She'd ask him what was wrong, and he'd say, "Nothing, I'm just tired." But tired men don't flinch when their wives touch them. Tired men don't suddenly start questioning every expense, every decision, every plan. One evening, Hannah suggested they start looking at baby names just for fun, a way to dream about their future. Mark's face went cold. "We're not ready for that," he said flatly. Hannah blinked, stunned. "I didn't mean now, I just meant, I know what you meant," Mark interrupted, his voice sharp. "But maybe we should focus on what's real instead of fantasies." The words cut deeper than he probably intended. Or maybe they didn't. Maybe that cruelty was exactly what he meant. Hannah didn't argue. She just nodded and went to bed alone that night, wondering when her husband started seeing her as the enemy. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Eleanor had been filling Mark's head with doubts for months. "Women like her see opportunity, not love," Eleanor would say during their private lunches. "She didn't come for money, Mark. People like that don't understand loyalty the way we do." And Lena, ever the perfect backup, would add her own poison with a sympathetic smile. "I just want you to be happy, Mark. I've seen women use pregnancy to trap men before. I'm not saying Hannah would do that, but just be careful." These lies, repeated enough times, became truth in Mark's mind. He started watching Hannah differently, not with love, but with suspicion. He questioned her late nights at work, even though she'd always worked late. He doubted her dedication, even though she'd sacrificed her own career opportunities to support him. The man who once called her his everything now treated her like a stranger he was trying to figure out. And the worst part? Hannah still believed she could fix it. She still believed love could win. She still believed her husband would wake up and remember who she was. But some men don't wake up until it's too late. And by then, the woman they underestimated has already become unstoppable. Have you ever loved someone who slowly stopped seeing you? Eleanor Renner didn't just control rooms. She owned them, shaped them, bent them to her will like clay in the hands of a master sculptor. She built her entire existence on 3 pillars: power, pedigree, and perfection. Her late husband had left her a fortune, but Eleanor wanted more than money. She wanted a legacy. She wanted a dynasty that would be whispered about in country clubs and corporate boardrooms for generations. And Mark, her only son, was supposed to be the crown jewel of that empire. So when he brought Hannah home and announced she was the woman he planned to marry, Eleanor's world didn't just crack, it shattered. This was not the plan. This was not the vision. This was a disaster wrapped in a smile. And Eleanor knew disasters had to be handled with precision. The first time Eleanor truly sized Hannah up was during that initial dinner, but the real assessment came later, when Hannah left the room. Eleanor turned to Mark with a look that could freeze oceans. "She's charming, I'll give her that," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "But charm doesn't build empires, Mark. Bloodlines do. Connections do. Power does." Mark shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, she's brilliant. You should see the way investors talk about her work. She's going to change entire industries." Eleanor waved her hand dismissively like she was swatting away a fly. "Brilliant girls are a dime a dozen in this world, darling. What matters is where she comes from, who her family knows, what doors she can open that aren't already open to us." Mark wanted to argue, wanted to defend Hannah, but the truth was he'd spent his entire life seeking his mother's approval. And when Eleanor withheld it, it felt like suffocation. "Just trust me," Eleanor continued, leaning forward with that practiced look of maternal concern. "I've seen girls like her before. They see opportunity, not love. They see wealth, not partnership. And when the money runs out or someone better comes along, they disappear." Mark didn't respond. He didn't agree, but he didn't disagree either. And that silence was Eleanor's opening. Over the next several months, Eleanor executed her plan with the patience of a chess master. She never attacked Hannah directly. That would be too obvious, too messy. Instead, she launched a campaign of subtle psychological warfare designed to erode Mark's confidence in his own marriage. At every family event, Eleanor made sure Lena Holloway was there, laughing at Mark's jokes, complimenting his ideas, standing just close enough to make people wonder. Lena was everything Eleanor wanted in a daughter-in-law, polished, connected, from a family whose name opened doors that money alone couldn't. She moved through social circles like silk, and Eleanor showcased her like a prize Mark had foolishly passed on. Lena was asking about you the other day, Eleanor mentioned casually one afternoon while Mark visited. She's launching a new initiative with her foundation and wants your advice. Such a brilliant young woman. So poised. Mark nodded absently, but Eleanor saw the flicker of interest in his eyes. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but it was curious. And curiosity, when nurtured carefully, could become something far more dangerous. Eleanor also weaponized doubt in the most insidious way, through questions that seemed innocent but planted suspicion like landmines. Does Hannah ever talk about her work? Eleanor asked Mark one evening over wine. I only ask because I heard from a colleague that she's been seen having late dinners with some executives. I'm sure it's nothing, but you know how people talk. Mark's jaw tightened. She works late sometimes. That's normal. Eleanor nodded slowly, as if considering his words. Of course. I'm not suggesting anything. I just think it's important you know what people are saying. A man should always know where his wife is, don't you think? The seed was planted. And once doubt takes root, it grows wild. Mark started noticing things he never questioned before. Hannah's late nights, her phone calls she sometimes took in another room, the way she smiled when she talked about certain colleagues. None of it was suspicious before, but now, filtered through his mother's poison, everything looked like betrayal. Have you ever watched someone you love start doubting you for no reason? Then came the pregnancy. When Hannah nervously told Mark she was expecting, his reaction wasn't joy, it was panic. Is this something you planned? He asked, his voice hard and cold. Hannah's face fell. Planned? Mark, we're married. This is our baby. But Mark wasn't hearing her. He was hearing Eleanor's voice in his head, the warnings about women who trap men, the accusations about ulterior motives. I need to think, he muttered, walking out of the room, before Hannah could even process what just happened. She stood there alone, one hand on her stomach, tears streaming down her face, wondering how the man who once promised her forever had just made her feel like a criminal for carrying his child. Eleanor didn't waste a second. The next day, she invited Mark for lunch at her private club, a place where power brokers made deals over lobster and lies. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand with manufactured concern. Mark, sweetheart, I need to be honest with you. I've heard some troubling things. Mark looked up, his face tight with stress. What things? Eleanor sighed dramatically, like the words physically pained her. People are saying Hannah's been planning this pregnancy for months. That she knew your company was about to close a major deal and wanted to secure her position before you realized what she was doing. Mark's face went pale. That's insane. Who's saying that? Eleanor leaned back, her expression carefully neutral. Does it matter? What matters is perception, darling. And right now, people are perceiving your wife as someone who's playing a very calculated game. Before Mark could respond, Lena appeared at their table as if on cue, her timing too perfect to be coincidence. I'm so sorry to interrupt, Lena said softly, her voice dripping with false sympathy. I just wanted to say hello. She slid into the booth with a grace that felt rehearsed, and Eleanor immediately brightened. Lena, darling, join us. Mark could use a friendly face right now. Lena didn't mention Hannah at first. She was too smart for that. Instead, she talked about loyalty, about trust, about how rare it was to find people who truly cared about you and not what you could give them. Then, as if reluctantly, she placed her hand on Mark's arm and said, I don't know if I should tell you this, but people have been talking. They say Hannah's been spending a lot of time with someone from her firm. Late nights, private meetings. I don't want to believe it, Mark, but you deserve to know what's being said. The lie landed like a blade between his ribs. Mark sat there frozen, his world collapsing around him, while two women he thought cared about him fed him poison, disguised as concern. And the worst part? He believed them. He believed them because doubt is easier than trust when you're already afraid. By the time Mark left that lunch, he wasn't a husband anymore. He was a victim, a man who convinced himself he'd been manipulated, trapped, deceived. And Eleanor watched him walk away with a smile hidden behind her wine glass, knowing she had won. But she hadn't won. She'd only started a war. And the woman she underestimated was about to become a force that would burn their entire world to the ground. Would you stay silent if your family turned your husband against you? Hannah spent 3 days staring at the positive pregnancy test before she found the courage to tell Mark. She kept it hidden in her drawer, wrapped in tissue paper like a secret too fragile to speak out loud. Part of her was terrified of his reaction, but a deeper part, the part that still believed in the man she married, hoped this baby would be the miracle that saved them. She imagined his face softening when she told him, imagined him pulling her close and whispering that everything would be okay. She imagined something wrong. The night she finally gathered the strength to share the news, Mark came home late, his tie loose and his eyes distant. Hannah had prepared his favorite meal, set the table with candles, and tried to create a moment that felt sacred. "Mark, I need to talk to you about something important," she said softly as he sat down. He barely looked up from his phone. "Can it wait? I've had a long day." Hannah's heart sank, but she pressed forward. "No, it can't wait. Mark, I'm pregnant." The silence that followed felt like death. Mark's head snapped up, his expression unreadable, and for a moment Hannah thought she saw fear flash across his face. Then his jaw tightened and his voice came out cold. "So this wasn't an accident?" Hannah blinked, confused. "What are you saying?" Mark stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I'm saying it's convenient, Hannah. Real convenient timing." She felt like she'd been slapped. "Convenient? Mark, we're married. This is our child." But he was already walking away, pulling out his phone, his fingers moving fast like he was texting someone who mattered more than the woman carrying his baby. "I need space," he muttered without looking back. "I need to think." Hannah stood there alone in the dining room, the candles flickering like her hope, wondering when her husband had stopped being her partner and started being her enemy. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, to force him to see her, but her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. "Dignity don't break, baby." So she swallowed the rage, blinked back the tears, and cleared the table in silence. That night, she slept alone while Mark stayed out until 3 in the morning. She didn't ask where he went. She already knew the answer would destroy her. What she didn't know was that while she cried herself to sleep, Eleanor was orchestrating the final phase of her plan. The next morning, Eleanor called Mark with urgency in her voice. "We need to talk. Now. Meet me at the club in an hour." Mark arrived to find his mother already seated in a private corner booth, her face tight with concern that looked almost genuine. She reached across the table and grabbed his hands the moment he sat down. "Mark, I'm worried about you," she began, her voice low and serious. "This pregnancy, the timing of it, everything about this feels wrong." Mark rubbed his face, exhausted. "I don't know what to think anymore, Mom. Everything's happening so fast." Eleanor leaned closer, her grip tightening. "That's exactly what she wants. Confusion. Chaos. A baby changes everything, Mark. Inheritance, control, legal rights. Don't you see? She's trapping you." Mark wanted to defend Hannah, wanted to believe his wife wasn't capable of manipulation, but the doubt Eleanor had been planting for months had grown roots too deep to pull out. "I just don't understand why she didn't talk to me first," he said weakly. "Because she knew you'd see through it," Eleanor replied smoothly. "She knew you'd ask questions. So she made sure there was no room for questions. Now you're locked in." The words settled into Mark's chest like stones. Before he could respond, Lena appeared at their table again, her timing so perfect it felt scripted. And it was. "I'm so sorry," Lena said, her voice trembling with fake emotion. "I didn't want to come, but Eleanor said you needed support." She slid into the booth, her eyes full of manufactured sympathy. "Mark, I hate being the one to tell you this, but people are talking. They're saying Hannah's been having late-night meetings with another man from her firm. I've heard his name mentioned multiple times. Mark's blood went cold. Who? Lena hesitated, playing her role perfectly. I don't want to spread rumors, but his name is David. David Chun. He's one of the senior partners she works with. I've seen photos of them together at dinners, conferences. I'm not saying anything happened, but the timing, Mark. The timing is suspicious. It was a lie so carefully constructed it felt like truth. Hannah had worked with David Chun on projects for years. He was a mentor, a colleague, nothing more. But in Mark's fractured mind, mentorship looked like betrayal. Late work nights looked like affairs. Professional dinners looked like evidence. Eleanor watched her son crumble and felt nothing but satisfaction. You deserve better than this, Mark, she said gently. You deserve a woman who values you, respects you, and doesn't play games with your future. Lena placed her hand on his shoulder, her touch light but deliberate. You're not alone in this. We're here for you. And just like that, the war was won. Mark left that lunch convinced his wife had deceived him, trapped him, betrayed him. He didn't question the lies because they fit the narrative his mother had been building for months. He didn't demand proof because Eleanor and Lena had given him just enough detail to make the story feel real. And when a man wants to believe he's the victim, he'll ignore every piece of evidence that says otherwise. Over the next 2 weeks, Mark became a stranger in his own home. He stopped asking Hannah about her day, stopped touching her, stopped looking at her like she was human. He moved through their house like a ghost, cold and distant, while Hannah tried desperately to reach him. Mark, please talk to me, she begged one evening after he ignored her for the 3rd day straight. What did I do? Just tell me what I did wrong. He turned slowly, his eyes empty. You really want to know? His voice was sharp, bitter. You got pregnant on purpose to trap me. You've been lying to me for months. And now you're standing here pretending to be innocent. Hannah felt the room spin. What are you talking about? Who told you that? Mark laughed, a sound so cruel it didn't even sound like him. Does it matter? Everyone knows, Hannah. Everyone sees what you are, except me. I was the fool who believed you actually loved me. The words hit her like bullets. Hannah opened her mouth to defend herself, to explain, to fight back, but what was the point? He'd already decided she was guilty. Eleanor had poisoned him so thoroughly there was no antidote left. I do love you, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I've always loved you. Mark turned away. Love doesn't look like this. That night, Hannah sat alone in the dark, her hand resting on her growing belly, and realized the man she married was gone. The marriage she fought for was dead, and the family she dreamed of building had been destroyed by lies she couldn't even defend against. But something shifted in her that night. The sadness began to harden into something colder, sharper. Her grandmother used to say, when people show you who they are, believe them the first time. Mark had shown her. Eleanor had shown her. Lena had shown her. And Hannah finally believed them. She didn't know yet that a $10 billion deal was waiting for her signature. She didn't know yet that the board of directors had been watching her brilliance for years. She didn't know yet that she was about to become one of the most powerful women in the country. But she knew one thing for certain. She was done begging for respect from people who saw her as nothing. And when a woman like Hannah stops begging and starts planning, the whole world should pay attention. Have you ever been accused of something you didn't do by someone you loved? The shift in Mark happened so gradually that Hannah tried to convince herself it was temporary. Just a rough patch every marriage goes through. But rough patches don't last 3 months. Rough patches don't turn your husband into a stranger who looks at you like you're something he regrets. Mark started coming home later and later, sometimes past midnight, always with an excuse that sounded rehearsed. The client meeting ran long. Traffic was terrible. I had to finish some reports. Hannah stopped asking after the first dozen lies because the truth was worse than the deception. He simply didn't want to be around her anymore. She'd hear his car pull into the driveway, and her heart would lift with foolish hope. thinking maybe tonight would be different. Maybe tonight he'd walk through the door and remember he loved her. But when he came inside, his eyes would scan right past her like she was furniture, and he'd head straight to his office without a word. Some nights, she'd make his favorite dinner and set the table, hoping food could bridge the gap words couldn't cross. He'd eat in silence, scrolling through his phone, and leave his plate on the table for her to clean. "How was your day?" she'd ask softly, desperately trying to find the man she married somewhere inside this cold shell. "Fine," he'd mutter without looking up. "Yours." "The baby kicked today," she'd say, her voice breaking with emotion. "I felt it for the first time." Mark would nod absently, like she'd just told him about the weather. "That's good." Then he'd stand and walk away, leaving her sitting there alone with tears streaming down her face, and a baby growing inside her that would never know its father's love. Eleanor kept fueling the distance with surgical precision, never letting Mark forget the lies she'd planted. Every Sunday dinner at the Renner estate became a performance of passive aggression aimed directly at Hannah. "You look tired, dear," Eleanor would say with fake concern, her eyes scanning Hannah's face like she was searching for cracks. "Pregnancy must be so exhausting when you're not used to taking care of yourself." Hannah would smile politely, refusing to take the bait. "I'm managing fine, thank you." Eleanor would sip her wine slowly, letting the silence stretch before adding, "Well, managing is one thing. Thriving is another. Some women are just built for motherhood naturally. Others have to work much harder at it." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Mark never defended her. He'd sit there cutting a steak, eyes down, pretending not to hear the venom dripping from his mother's mouth. And Lena, who somehow ended up at every single family gathering, would jump in with her perfectly timed sweetness. "I'm sure Hannah will be a wonderful mother," Lena would say, reaching across the table to pat Hannah's hand with a touch that felt more like ownership than comfort. "It's such a blessing to bring a child into a stable, loving home." The emphasis on stable and loving was so subtle most people wouldn't catch it, but Hannah did. She caught every single dig, every calculated word, every performance designed to make her feel like an outsider in her own marriage. But the worst part wasn't Eleanor's cruelty or Lena's manipulations. The worst part was watching Mark choose them over her, day after day, moment after moment, until she realized he wasn't being manipulated anymore. He wanted to believe their lies. One evening, Hannah was in the kitchen preparing dinner when Mark came home and walked straight to the fridge. He opened it, stared inside for a moment, then slammed it shut so hard the bottles rattled. "Nothing's ever organized in this house," he snapped. Hannah turned from the stove, confused. "I organized it this morning. What are you looking for?" Mark's face twisted with anger that seemed way too big for the situation. "That's not the point, Hannah. The point is nothing in this marriage works the way it's supposed to." She felt her chest tighten. "What are you really upset about, Mark?" "Because this isn't about the fridge." He laughed bitterly, a sound that cut through her like glass. "You want the truth? Fine. I'm upset that I can't trust my own wife. I'm upset that everyone around me sees what's happening except me. I'm upset that I fell for this whole act." Hannah's hands started shaking. "What act? Mark, what are you talking about?" He stepped closer, his voice dropping to something cold and venomous. "The pregnancy, the timing, the lies about working late. David Chun. Should I keep going, or are you going to keep pretending you don't know what I'm talking about?" The name hit her like a punch. "David Chin? My colleague David? Mark, he's married with 3 kids. We work together on projects. That's it." Mark shook his head slowly, his expression full of disgust. "That's exactly what someone would say if they were hiding something." Hannah felt something break inside her chest, something that had been holding on by a thread for months. "I have never, not once, betrayed you. But you've already decided I'm guilty, haven't you? Your mother told you I was, so it must be true. Lena whispered some lies, so they must be facts. You don't want proof, Mark. You want permission to hate me." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Doubt, maybe guilt, maybe the smallest recognition that he'd gone too far. But then his phone buzzed, and he looked down to see a text from Lena. Hannah couldn't see what it said, but she saw the way his face hardened again. "I'm done with this conversation," he said flatly. "I'm going out." "Where?" she asked, hating how desperate she sounded. "Does it matter?" he shot back. "You're going to accuse me of something either way." And just like that, he was gone, leaving Hannah standing in the kitchen with dinner burning on the stove and tears burning in her eyes. She turned off the burner, sat down at the table, and finally let herself feel the full weight of what was happening. Her marriage was dying, not because of anything she'd done, but because the people who were supposed to love her had decided she was easier to destroy than defend. But here's what Eleanor and Lena and Mark didn't understand about women like Hannah. Women raised by grandmothers who survived impossible things. Women who learned early that grace under pressure wasn't weakness, but warfare. Hannah wasn't crying because she was broken. She was crying because she was finally letting go of the man who didn't deserve her. And once a woman like that stops fighting for you and starts fighting for herself, there's no force on earth that can stop what comes next. That night, while Mark was out doing God knows what with God knows who, Hannah sat in the nursery she'd been slowly preparing and made a decision. She placed both hands on her belly and whispered to the child growing inside her, "I don't know what's coming, baby, but I promise you this. We're going to be okay. Better than okay. Because your mama isn't who they think she is." She didn't know yet that in 72 hours, everything would explode. She didn't know yet that she'd be standing in the Renner estate covered in dirty water while the world watched. She didn't know yet that her humiliation would become the spark that lit a fire so big it would burn down everything Mark and Eleanor had built. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was done shrinking to fit into their small, cruel world. And when women stop shrinking, they start rising. And when they rise, the people who tried to bury them realize, too late, that they didn't plant a victim. They planted a storm. Have you ever stayed too long in something that was slowly killing you? Hannah only needed one thing from the Renner estate that Tuesday evening. A single box of financial documents related to Mark's family holdings. Papers she needed for the clean energy deal she'd been quietly negotiating for 8 months. A deal so massive it would change her life forever. But she hadn't told Mark about it yet, because she wanted everything finalized first, wanted to walk in with proof of what she'd accomplished instead of promises he'd probably twist into more accusations. She wanted to secure their child's future before he could claim she was using the baby to manipulate him. So she kept it secret, kept working late nights while he assumed the worst, kept building an empire while he tore down their marriage. That evening, she drove to the estate around 7, the sun already starting its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked almost like a warning. When she pulled up to the massive gates, something felt wrong. The air was too still, too heavy, like the whole property was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. Hannah parked near the side entrance and walked around to the back garden where the family kept their business files in a separate office building. But before she could reach the door, she heard voices. Laughter. The kind that sounds like conspiracy. Eleanor and Lena were sitting on the patio, wine glasses in hand, their heads close together like two witches plotting over a cauldron. When they saw Hannah, their laughter stopped, but their smiles grew wider, sharper, meaner. Well, Eleanor said, setting down her glass slowly. Look who decided to show up uninvited. Hannah kept her voice calm, refusing to engage. I'm not here for a visit, Eleanor. I just need some documents from the business office. Mark knows I'm coming. That was a lie, but a necessary one. Eleanor stood, smoothing her designer dress like she was preparing for battle. Does he now? Because Mark tells us everything. And he didn't mention you'd be snooping around our property. I'm not snooping, Hannah said evenly. I'm collecting papers I need for work. I'll be in and out in 5 minutes. Lena rose gracefully, moving to stand beside Eleanor like they were a united front. It's interesting how you always need something from this family, isn't it, Hannah? Always taking, never giving. Always around when there's something to gain. Hannah felt her jaw tighten, but kept her composure. I don't owe you an explanation, Lena. You're not part of this family. The words landed exactly as intended. Lena's smile faltered for just a second before she recovered. Not yet, she said quietly. But some women know their place. And some don't. Before Hannah could respond, Mark appeared from inside the house, and the moment she saw his face, she knew this wasn't going to end well. His eyes were dark, empty, filled with something that looked like hatred. Whatever Eleanor and Lena had been feeding him had finally consumed him completely. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice flat and cold. "I need those financial documents we talked about last month," Hannah said carefully. "The ones in your father's old office. It'll only take a minute." Mark's face twisted. "You mean the documents you're probably planning to use against me? Against this family?" Hannah blinked, stunned. "Against you?" "Mark, they're for a business deal I'm working on. I told you about this months ago." "You told me a lot of things," he shot back. "Most of them were lies." Eleanor stepped forward, her voice dripping with false concern. "Mark, darling, don't let her manipulate you again. She's here to steal from us. That's what people like her do." "I'm not stealing anything." Hannah's voice finally broke through her calm. "I'm collecting documents I have every legal right to access as your wife. Documents I need for legitimate work." Lena moved closer to Mark, her hand sliding onto his arm with possessive ease. "She's lying, Mark. Why else would she show up unannounced? Why else would she sneak around? She's been planning this for months, taking advantage of your trust." Hannah felt her entire body go cold. She looked at Lena's hand on Mark's arm, looked at the way he didn't pull away, and finally understood the full scope of what she'd been too blind to see. "You're sleeping with her," Hannah said quietly, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Mark didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it either. He just stared at her with those empty eyes, while Lena smiled like she'd already won. Eleanor jumped in quickly, her voice rising with manufactured outrage. "How dare you come here and accuse people of things when you're the one who's been cheating? When you're the one who trapped my son with a baby that probably isn't even his?" The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Hannah felt the world tilt. "What did you just say?" "You heard me," Eleanor hissed. "That baby you're carrying could be anyone's. David Chen's, for all we know. You've been using my son for his money while sleeping with—" "Stop," Hannah whispered, her voice shaking. "Just stop." But Eleanor didn't stop. She stepped closer, her face twisted with venom. "You are a leech, a parasite, a nothing from nowhere who saw an opportunity and took it. And now you have the audacity to come to our home and make demands." Hannah's hands were shaking so badly she had to clench them into fists. "I have never betrayed Mark. Not once. But you've been poisoning him against me since the day we met. You couldn't stand that he chose me, so you decided to destroy me." Eleanor laughed, a sound so cruel it didn't seem human. "Destroy you? Darling, you destroyed yourself. You just didn't realize it yet." That's when Mark moved. He walked past Hannah without looking at her, grabbed a bucket sitting near the garden hose, a bucket filled with murky water that had been used to wash tools and garden equipment, brown with dirt and soap and dead leaves floating on the surface. And before Hannah could even process what was happening, he lifted it and threw the entire contents directly at her. The water hit her like a physical blow. Cold, filthy, reeking. It soaked through her hair, her clothes, ran down her face and into her eyes. For a moment, the entire world went silent. Eleanor gasped dramatically, her hand flying to her mouth like she was shocked, but her eyes glittered with satisfaction. Lena stepped back, her face arranged in false horror, but the smile pulling at the corners of her lips gave her away. And Mark just stood there, chest heaving, bucket still in his hand, waiting for Hannah to scream, to cry, to collapse into the humiliation they'd orchestrated. But Hannah didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't give them the satisfaction. She wiped the dirty water from her face with slow, deliberate movements, her hands steady despite the rage burning through her veins. Then she lifted her chin and looked at all three of them with a calmness that felt like judgment from something higher than any of them could touch. "This was your final mistake," she said, her voice quiet but cutting through the silence like a blade. That was all. 4 words. Then she turned and walked away, her back straight, her head high, the setting sun casting her soaked silhouette in gold like she was walking through fire instead of fleeing from it. None of them saw the security camera mounted on the corner of the house, its lens pointed directly at the patio, recording every single second. None of them realized that the footage would go viral within 48 hours, that millions of people would watch Mark Renner throw dirty water on his pregnant wife, that the court of public opinion would destroy him before Hannah ever had to lift a finger. None of them understood that humiliating a woman like Hannah wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of theirs. Because women who walk away with dignity intact are the most dangerous kind. They don't fight back immediately. They don't scream or threaten or collapse. They go silent. They plan. They build. And when they finally strike, the people who humiliated them realized too late that they didn't break her. They unleashed her. Hannah drove home that night soaking wet, her hands gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white, and made a phone call that would change everything. "Mr. Chun," she said when he answered, "I'm ready to sign the deal. All of it. Let's move forward immediately." On the other end, David Chun smiled. He'd been waiting for this call for months, waiting for Hannah to finally realize her worth. "Welcome to the table, Hannah," he said quietly. "Let's build an empire." And just like that, the war was over. Mark and Eleanor and Lena just didn't know it yet. Would you walk away with dignity or burn everything down? The morning after Hannah disappeared, Mark woke up feeling something he hadn't felt in months. Relief. She was gone, vanished without a word, no dramatic confrontation, no tears, no begging. Just silence. He told himself this was what he wanted, what he needed, freedom from a woman he'd convinced himself had been using him all along. Eleanor threw a private brunch that weekend. Champagne flowing like water, her laughter echoing through the estate like she'd just won the lottery. "Finally," she said, raising her glass to Mark with a smile so smug it could cut diamonds. "You're free of that burden. Now we can get your life back on track." Lena was there too, of course, sitting closer to Mark than she ever had before, her hand resting on his knee under the table where she thought no one could see. She'd moved some of her things into the guest room at the estate already, testing the waters, claiming she was just helping Mark through this difficult time. But everyone knew what was really happening. The mistress was moving in before the wife's side of the bed had even gone cold. Mark should have felt victorious. Instead, he felt hollow, like something essential had been carved out of his chest, and he was only now starting to notice the bleeding. But Eleanor and Lena didn't give him time to think too deeply. They kept him busy, kept him distracted, kept feeding him the same narrative they'd been selling for months. "You made the right choice," Lena would whisper when they were alone. "She was never good enough for you anyway." Mark would nod, but the nods were starting to feel mechanical, forced. Something was nagging at him. A voice in the back of his mind asking questions he didn't want to answer. Like why Hannah left without taking anything. Why didn't she fight for the house, or the money, or even her clothes? Why she just vanished like smoke, like she had somewhere better to be, someone better to become. A week after Hannah disappeared, small cracks started forming in the perfect story Eleanor and Lena had built. The housekeeper, Maria, approached Mark one morning while he was having coffee alone in the garden. "Mr. Renner," she said quietly, her voice nervous. "I need to tell you something." Mark looked up, irritated. "What is it, Maria?" She glanced around to make sure they were alone. Mrs. Renner, the young Mrs. Renner, Hannah. She wasn't doing what they said she was doing. "I saw Mrs. Eleanor and Miss Lena meeting in secret for weeks before all this happened. They were planning something. I heard them talking about making you believe she was cheating even though she wasn't." Mark's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. "What are you talking about?" Maria's hands twisted together nervously. "I'm sorry, sir, but it's true. Miss Lena, she was the one who told you to check Hannah's phone that day. She gave you the password. But Hannah never gave her that password. Miss Lena got it from somewhere else. And those photos they showed you of Hannah with that man? I saw Miss Lena on her computer editing something days before. I didn't understand then, but I do now." The words hit Mark like a freight train. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because it's not right, sir," Maria said, her eyes filling with tears. "Mrs. Hannah was always kind to me, always respectful. She didn't deserve what happened to her. And that baby," her voice broke. That baby was yours. Anyone with eyes could see it. She loved you so much, and they destroyed her for no reason except jealousy. Before Mark could respond, Maria walked away quickly, disappearing into the house like she was afraid she'd already said too much. Mark sat there alone, his mind racing, trying to process what he'd just heard. He wanted to dismiss it, wanted to believe Maria was confused or lying or mistaken. But deep down, something clicked into place. The timing had always been too perfect. Lena's evidence had always appeared right when Eleanor needed it. The accusations had always escalated exactly when Mark started doubting them. It was too coordinated to be a coincidence. That evening, another staff member, James the groundskeeper, pulled Mark aside near the garage. "I shouldn't say anything," James muttered, "but I can't stay quiet anymore. Your mother and that Lena woman, they were meeting every Tuesday for months before your wife left. I heard them arguing once. Lena said something like, you promised he'd leave her faster if we made him think she cheated. Your mother told her to be patient, that these things take time." Mark felt his stomach drop. "You're sure that's what they said?" James nodded solemnly. "I'm sure, sir. I thought about telling you sooner, but I need this job. But after what happened last week, after seeing you throw that water on your wife," he shook his head, "I can't keep this inside anymore. That woman never did anything wrong, Mr. Renner. They set her up. They played you." Mark's world started spinning. He walked back into the house on shaking legs, his mind replaying every conversation, every accusation, every moment that had led him to believe Hannah was the enemy. And suddenly it all looked different, felt different, like watching a movie where you finally realize the hero was actually the villain all along. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Lena slept peacefully beside him. And he felt sick. Not just regret, actual physical nausea at what he'd done, what he'd believed, what he'd destroyed with his own hands. He got up quietly and went to his study, pulling out old text messages, old emails, looking for proof that he'd been right to doubt Hannah. Instead, he found the opposite. Messages from Hannah asking if he was okay, if he needed anything, if they could talk. Messages he'd ignored or responded to with coldness. Emails from her trying to explain her work schedule, her projects, her dreams for their future. Dreams he dismissed as manipulation. And then he found something that made his blood run cold. An email thread between Eleanor and Lena from 6 months ago, accidentally CC'd to his backup account he rarely checked. The subject line read, Phase 2, Pregnancy Problem. Mark opened it with trembling hands and read words that destroyed him. Eleanor had written, "If she gets pregnant, we accelerate everything. A baby gives her legal claim to the family money. We need Mark to believe it's not his before she can secure anything." Lena had responded, "I can plant the David Chin angle. I've already been building that narrative. When she announces the pregnancy, we make Mark doubt it immediately. I'll handle the emotional support angle. You handle the legal implications." Mark read the email 3 times, each time hoping he'd misunderstood, each time realizing he hadn't. They'd planned everything. They'd weaponized his insecurities, manipulated his fears, turned him into a monster who threw dirty water on his pregnant wife. And he'd let them. He'd believed them. He'd chosen them. He sat there in the dark, shaking, and realized the woman he'd destroyed was innocent. The child he'd rejected was his. The marriage he'd burned down was real. And the 2 women he'd trusted were the actual villains in this story. Before he could process what to do next, something else arrived that shattered whatever denial he had left. An envelope delivered to the gate by courier, with his name written in elegant script. Inside was a wedding invitation, thick, expensive paper, gold embossing, Lena's name at the top, and a date, 3 weeks from now. Mark stared at it, his hands shaking so badly the paper rustled. This invitation had been printed weeks ago, maybe even months ago. The date was set before he'd even filed for divorce, before Hannah had even left, before any of this had happened. Lena had planned their wedding before his marriage was even over. The invitation fell from his hands. Mark stumbled backward, hitting the desk, his breathing coming in short, sharp gasps. This wasn't love. This was strategy. This was a calculated takeover orchestrated by two women who saw him not as a person, but as a prize, a bank account, a means to an end. He thought about confronting them right then, demanding answers, screaming at them for what they'd done. But something stopped him. Maybe it was cowardice. Maybe it was a shock. Maybe it was the dawning realization that no confrontation would undo what he'd already done to Hannah. The damage was complete. The humiliation was recorded. The marriage was destroyed. And somewhere out there, the woman he'd thrown away like trash was carrying his child and probably hating him with every breath. Mark sank to the floor of his study and cried for the first time since he was a boy. He cried for Hannah. He cried for his child. He cried for the man he used to be before his mother's poison and his mistress's lies turned him into someone he didn't recognize. But tears don't fix broken things. And some mistakes are too big for apologies to cover. While Mark was unraveling in his study, Eleanor was sleeping peacefully in her wing of the estate, dreaming of her victory. And Lena was planning her wedding, convinced she'd won the war. Neither of them knew that Hannah wasn't broken. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't crying. She was building an empire that would crush them all so completely they'd never recover. The trap they'd set for her had snapped shut. But it hadn't caught Hannah. It had caught them. And the real consequences were just beginning. Have you ever realized too late that you destroyed the one person who truly loved you? While Mark was discovering the truth too late to matter, Hannah was 300 miles away in a coastal safe house that belonged to one of the senior partners at her firm, finally breathing air that didn't taste like betrayal. The house sat on a cliff overlooking the ocean, waves crashing against rocks below, with a rhythm that felt like the heartbeat she'd lost somewhere along the way. For the first 3 days, she did nothing but sleep, eat small meals that actually stayed down, and let her body remember what it felt like to exist without fear. No Eleanor watching her every move. No Mark treating her like a criminal. No Lena pretending to be concerned while sharpening knives behind her back. Just silence. Just peace. Just Hannah and the baby growing stronger inside her with every passing hour. On the fourth morning, she woke up differently. The sadness that had been drowning her for months had crystallized into something harder, clearer, more focused. She wasn't broken. She was done being broken. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind like a prayer. When they push you down, baby, you don't stay down. You get up and you show them what they made. Hannah placed both hands on her belly, feeling the small flutter of movement, and whispered, "We're going to be more than okay. We're going to be unstoppable." That afternoon, David Chun arrived with a leather briefcase and a smile that said he'd been waiting for this moment for years. He was 52, sharp as a blade, one of the most respected figures in clean energy investment, and he'd been mentoring Hannah since she first entered the industry. He'd watched her brilliance get overlooked, watched her ideas get credited to men who couldn't carry her laptop, watched her marriage slowly poison the light that made her exceptional. And now, finally, she was ready to step into the power she'd been denying herself. "You look better," he said, sitting across from her in the sunlit living room. 3 days of rest will do that," Hannah replied. "But I didn't ask you here to talk about my health." "I'm ready, David. I'm ready to sign." David opened the briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents that represented 8 months of negotiation, strategy, and vision. "This isn't just a job, Hannah. This is a complete transformation of your life. You'll be leading the largest clean energy merger in North American history. $10 billion. Partnerships with governments, corporations, environmental organizations across 3 countries. You'll have more power in one signature than most people accumulate in a lifetime." He paused, studying her face. "But once you sign this, there's no going back. You'll be in the spotlight. Your name will be everywhere. And everyone from your past, Mark, Eleanor, all of them, they'll see exactly who you really are. Are you ready for that?" Hannah didn't hesitate. "I've spent years hiding my light to make other people comfortable. I'm done with that. Show me where to sign." David slid the first document across the table. "Before you do, I need to give you options. The board has offered you 2 paths. Path 1. You sign under a new identity, take a different name, vanish completely from the world that hurt you. You'd still have the power, the money, the position, but you'd be free from anyone ever connecting you to Mark Renner again. Path 2. You sign as Hannah Caldwell. You let the world know exactly who you are and what you've accomplished. And you let the truth destroy everyone who tried to destroy you. Publicly. Completely. Permanently. Hannah looked at the documents, then at David, then out at the ocean where waves were reshaping the rocks with patient, relentless force. What would you do? She asked quietly. David leaned back, his expression serious. Honestly, I'd burn it all down. But I'm not you. And I'm not carrying a child who'll grow up with whatever choice you make. This decision has to be yours. Hannah closed her eyes and saw Mark's face the moment before he threw that water. Saw Eleanor's smug satisfaction. Saw Lena's fake sympathy hiding real venom. She saw every humiliation, every insult, every moment they made her feel small. Then she opened her eyes and felt her baby move, reminding her that this wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about making sure her child never grew up in a world where cruelty went unpunished and lies went unchallenged. Path 2, she said firmly. I want them to know. I want the world to know. And I want to do this in a way that leaves no doubt about who I am and what they threw away. David smiled, the kind of smile that said he'd hoped she'd choose this. Then let's build something they'll never forget. Over the next 2 weeks, Hannah worked harder than she'd ever worked in her life, but this time it wasn't work. It was warfare disguised as brilliance. She met with legal teams who built ironclad contracts. She met with PR specialists who crafted a narrative so powerful it would shift public opinion like an earthquake. She met with private investigators who uncovered every detail of Eleanor and Lena's conspiracy. The forged messages, the manipulated photos, the bribed staff members, the secret meetings, all of it documented with timestamps and receipts. And she met with financial analysts who showed her something that made her breath catch. Mark's company was drowning in debt he'd hidden from everyone, including his own board. The company was bleeding money, hemorrhaging investors, teetering on the edge of collapse. One more push and it would fall. And Hannah was in position to deliver that push. We can acquire the debt, David explained, pulling up charts on his laptop. It's complicated, but legal. You'd essentially control the company's financial future without Mark ever knowing until it's too late. You wouldn't own the company outright, but you'd own its survival. One signature from you, and they thrive. One signature, and they collapse. You'd hold the detonator. Hannah stared at the numbers, feeling power settle into her bones like medicine she didn't know she needed. How long would it take to set this up? 3 weeks, David said. Maybe less if we move fast. Then move fast, Hannah replied. I want everything ready before they even realize I'm still breathing. David nodded and made a phone call that set a dozen other plans into motion. While he talked, Hannah walked out onto the deck and looked at the ocean, her hand resting on her belly where her daughter was growing stronger every day. She didn't know yet that the baby was a girl, but somehow she felt it, knew it deep in her soul. And she made a promise to that little girl who would never meet the man who rejected her. Your father chose weakness over us, but we're going to choose strength. And when we're done, the whole world will know that the biggest mistake of his life was underestimating your mother. On the day Hannah finally signed the $10 billion deal, she wore a white dress that fit perfectly despite her growing belly, her hair pulled back in a style that made her look like royalty. David handed her the pen and said, "This is your moment, Hannah. Take it." She signed her name in bold, confident strokes, Hannah Caldwell, not Hannah Renner, because she'd already filed to take back her maiden name. The marriage was dead, but she was more alive than she'd ever been. The moment the ink dried, David raised his glass of sparkling water in a toast to the most powerful woman in clean energy, and to the people who are about to learn what happens when you break someone who knows how to rebuild. Hannah clinked her glass against his and felt something she hadn't felt in over a year. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. Not because she was about to destroy Mark and Eleanor and Lena, though that was coming, but because she'd finally stepped into the version of herself she was always meant to be. The version that didn't shrink. The version that didn't apologize for taking up space. The version that built empires while other people built excuses. That night, alone in the safe house with the ocean roaring below, Hannah opened her laptop and began drafting the press release that would detonate across every financial network in the country. She didn't write it with anger. She didn't write it with bitterness. She wrote it with the calm, devastating clarity of someone who knew the truth was the most powerful weapon she'd ever need. And when she was finished, she read it once, smiled, and scheduled it to go live in exactly 72 hours. Mark and Eleanor and Lena were still celebrating their victory, still planning weddings and plotting futures, still convinced they'd won. They had no idea that while they were toasting champagne, Hannah was loading the cannon that would obliterate everything they'd built. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's silent, strategic, and so perfectly executed that by the time your enemies realize they're falling, they're already on the ground. And Hannah Caldwell wasn't just falling, she was flying. Have you ever walked away from destruction only to come back as the storm? Mark woke up on a Tuesday morning thinking it would be just another day of drowning in guilt and pretending everything was fine. He hadn't slept well in weeks. His dreams haunted by the image of Hannah walking away covered in dirty water, her dignity intact while his crumbled. Lena was already up, humming in the kitchen, planning seating charts for a wedding Mark couldn't bring himself to care about anymore. Eleanor was probably on the phone somewhere spreading lies to her social circle, maintaining the image that everything had worked out perfectly. But nothing was perfect. Everything was rotting from the inside out, and Mark could feel it in his bones. He grabbed his phone off the nightstand and opened his news app like he did every morning, expecting stock updates and political headlines. Instead, the first thing he saw made his blood turn to ice. The headline screamed across every major financial network in bold letters that felt like a slap. Hannah Caldwell leads historic $10 billion clean energy merger. Announces new position AS majority partner in revolutionary deal. Mark dropped his phone. It clattered on the hardwood floor, screen cracking, but he didn't notice. He couldn't breathe. Couldn't process. Hannah? Hi, Hannah? The woman he'd called a parasite, a manipulator, a nobody? That Hannah was now being called one of the most powerful figures in North American finance. He bent down with shaking hands and picked up the phone, reading the article with growing horror. It detailed Hannah's 8-month negotiation to lead a merger that would transform clean energy across 3 countries, create thousands of jobs, and position her as the youngest executive to ever close a deal of this magnitude. Analysts were calling it brilliant, visionary, world-changing, and every single word felt like a knife twisting deeper into Mark's chest because he'd had no idea. While he'd been accusing her of cheating, she'd been building this. While he'd been listening to his mother's poison, she'd been negotiating with governments. While he'd been throwing dirty water on her, she'd been becoming untouchable. Mark. Lena's voice cut through his spiral. She was standing in the doorway, her face pale, phone in hand. Have you seen the news? He couldn't speak, just nodded. Lena's voice went shrill, panic cracking through her usual composure. How is this possible? How did she? When did she? This doesn't make sense. She was nobody. She had nothing. Mark finally found his voice, though it came out broken. She was never nobody. That was the lie we told ourselves to feel better about what we did to her. Lena's face twisted with anger. Don't you dare defend her now. After everything we went through to get rid of her, you're going to get rid of her? Mark's head snapped up, his voice rising. Is that what you call it? Get rid of her? We destroyed her, Lena. We humiliated her. I threw filthy water on my pregnant wife because you and my mother convinced me she was the enemy. Before Lena could respond, Eleanor burst into the room, her face red with fury. Her phone clutched so tight her knuckles were white. This is a disaster. Do you understand what this means? That woman now has more power than this entire family combined. She's on every channel, every website, She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes fixed on the TV that Lena had just turned on. Hannah's face filled the screen. She was standing at a podium in a conference room, looking radiant despite being visibly pregnant, her hair styled elegantly, her dress tailored perfectly, her presence so commanding it made the room feel too small to hold her. Mark felt his heart stop. She looked strong, healthy, untouchable. Nothing like the broken woman he'd imagined when she disappeared. The press conference was already underway, and Hannah's voice, calm, clear, powerful, cut through the chaos in Mark's mind like a bell. "I want to thank the board for their trust in my vision," Hannah was saying. "This merger represents more than financial success. It represents a commitment to sustainable futures, to innovation that serves communities, to leadership that values integrity over ego." She paused, and Mark saw something flicker in her eyes, something that looked like steel wrapped in grace. "I also want to speak directly to women who have been silenced in their marriages, diminished in their workplaces, told they were nothing by people who should have protected them. This achievement isn't just mine. It belongs to every woman who refused to stay small when the world demanded it." The reporters erupted with questions, but Hannah raised her hand and the room went silent. "I won't take questions about my personal life," she continued, "but I will say this. There are women right now enduring what I endured, being accused without evidence, being controlled by in-laws who weaponize family, being betrayed by people who claim to love them. To those women, I say, your worth is not determined by the people who failed to see it. Your strength is not measured by how long you stayed. And your future is not limited by what they told you was possible." Mark felt tears streaming down his face. Every word was a mirror reflecting his own sins back at him, and he couldn't look away. Hannah never mentioned his name, never pointed a finger, never descended into the mud. She didn't have to. The whole world knew exactly who she was talking about. Social media exploded within minutes. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Every platform flooded with support for Hannah and fury toward Mark. People posted side-by-side photos. Hannah, in her press conference, looking like a queen, and someone had leaked the security footage of Mark throwing dirty water on her. The video went viral, so fast it crashed on 3 different platforms. Millions of people watched Mark Renner humiliate his pregnant wife, watched her walk away with dignity, while he stood there like a monster. Comments poured in by the thousands. She was building an empire while he was destroying their marriage. Imagine throwing away a woman like that for your mother and a mistress. He's going to regret this for the rest of his life. She didn't just leave him. She leveled up. By noon, Mark's phone was exploding with calls from board members, investors, business partners, all of them demanding answers, distancing themselves, pulling funding. His company's stock dropped 17% in 2 hours. Sponsors withdrew their contracts. Clients canceled meetings. The Renner name, once synonymous with prestige, was now associated with cruelty, stupidity, and waste. Eleanor collapsed onto the sofa, her face ashen, her empire crumbling around her. "This can't be happening," she whispered. "We were supposed to win. You were supposed to destroy her," Mark finished, his voice hollow. "And you did. You just didn't realize you destroyed me in the process." Lena was pacing frantically, scrolling through her phone, watching her own reputation implode as people connected the dots. Articles were already being written with titles like "The Mistress Who Helped Destroy a Marriage and Lost Everything." Her social media accounts were flooded with hate. Her foundation lost owners. Her family's business partners started making excuses to avoid association. Everything she'd schemed for, everything she'd manipulated toward, was disintegrating in real time. "Mark, you have to fix this," Lena begged, her voice shaking. "Call her. Apologize. Tell her." "Tell her what?" Mark's laugh was bitter broken. "Tell her I'm sorry I believed lies about her. Sorry I rejected my own child. Sorry I threw water on her like she was trash. What words exist that could possibly fix what I did?" He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the estate that suddenly felt like a prison. "She doesn't need my apology, Lena. She doesn't need anything from me. She's built a life I can't even touch. And I'm standing in the ruins of everything I destroyed with my own hands." But Hannah wasn't done. While Mark and Eleanor and Lena were watching their world collapse, Hannah was in a private meeting with her legal team and financial advisors, reviewing documents that would deliver the final blow. David Chun sat beside her, a slight smile on his face. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked. "Once this information goes public, there's no coming back for any of them." Hannah looked at the documents detailing her quiet acquisition of Mark's company debt, the financial chokehold she now had on everything the Renner family had built. She thought about her daughter growing inside her, thought about the life they'd have together, thought about the example she wanted to set. "I'm not doing this to destroy them," Hannah said quietly. "I'm doing this to make sure they can never destroy anyone else. Release it." David nodded and sent an email that would hit every financial news outlet within the hour. The headline would read, "Hannah Caldwell acquires controlling interest in Renner Industries debt. Family empire now at her mercy." Mark would find out the same way the world did, through a news alert that would feel like a death sentence. Because Hannah hadn't just survived his betrayal. She hadn't just moved on. She had risen so far above him that she now controlled his entire future with one signature. And the beautiful, terrifying truth was that she didn't even need to use that power to destroy him. Just knowing she had it was enough destruction. Can you imagine watching someone you underestimated become everything you'll never be? Mark tried calling Hannah 47 times in 3 days. Every call went straight to voicemail. Every text turned green, undelivered, blocked. Every email bounced back with an automated message that felt more human than anything he deserved. This recipient is no longer accepting messages from this address. He even tried sending letters through his lawyer, desperate pleas scrawled on paper that felt pathetic the moment he sealed the envelopes. But Hannah's security team intercepted everything, returning each letter unopened with a single typed note. "Ms. Caldwell has instructed us to protect her peace. Please respect her boundaries." That phrase, "protect her peace," cut deeper than any insult could have. Because Mark knew he'd been the one who shattered that peace, who turned her life into a war zone, who made her home feel like enemy territory. And now she was rebuilding walls he'd never be allowed past again. Meanwhile, the world kept turning against him with the force of an avalanche that wouldn't stop until everything was buried. Investors pulled funding so fast his company's accounts looked like they were hemorrhaging. Board members called emergency meetings where Mark's leadership was questioned with barely concealed contempt. "How did you not know your wife was negotiating a $10 billion deal?" one board member demanded during a particularly brutal conference call. "What else don't you know about your own household?" Mark had no answer because the truth was humiliating. He'd been so busy believing lies about Hannah that he'd missed the truth entirely. She'd been working on the biggest deal of her career, while he accused her of affairs she never had, questioned a pregnancy that was always his, and threw dirty water on the woman who should have been celebrated. The press coverage was relentless and brutal. Every article about Hannah's success included a sidebar about Mark's failure. The husband who threw it all away, from power couple to public disgrace. Mark Renner's billion-dollar mistake. His face became a meme, a cautionary tale, a joke that strangers shared across the internet with gleeful cruelty. But the worst part, the part that made him physically ill, came when a private investigator Hannah had hired dropped a package at his gate. Inside was a file so thick it looked like evidence for a murder trial. And in a way it was the murder of any possible redemption Mark thought he might still have. The file contained everything. Text messages between Eleanor and Lena dating back 14 months, detailing their entire conspiracy. Mark's getting too comfortable with her. "We need to plant out now, before it's too late." Forged screenshots they'd created to make it look like Hannah was texting another man. Receipts from a graphic designer Lena had paid $2,000 to doctor photos of Hannah at a restaurant with David Chun, making a professional dinner look intimate. Timestamps proving Eleanor and Lena had met secretly every Tuesday for months, coordinating their attacks with military precision. Bank transfers showing Eleanor had paid a staff member $5,000 to lie about seeing Hannah with someone else. Every single piece of evidence was documented, dated, notarized, impossible to deny. Mark sat at his desk reading page after page, his hands shaking so badly the papers rustled like leaves in a storm. They'd built an entire fictional narrative, fed it to him piece by piece, and watched him swallow it like poison disguised as medicine. And he'd believe them. He'd chosen their lies over Hannah's truth because believing her would have required him to stand up to his mother, and Mark had never been strong enough to do that. He'd been weak, cowardly, and now there was documented proof of just how pathetic that weakness had made him. He closed the file and sat in silence for what felt like hours, feeling the full weight of what he'd done crushed him from the inside out. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was destruction he'd participated in willingly, eagerly, because it was easier than admitting his mother was a monster and his mistress was a manipulator. That night, Mark finally confronted Eleanor. He walked into her sitting room where she was having tea like nothing had changed, like her son's life wasn't imploding around them both. "I know everything," Mark said, his voice cold and flat. "I know what you did. What you and Lena planned. I have proof." Eleanor's teacup paused halfway to her lips, her expression flickering with something that might have been fear before settling into defiance. "I did what was necessary to protect this family," she said calmly. "That woman was going to drain our resources, tarnish our name. She was my wife." Mark's voice cracked, all the rage and grief finally breaking through. "She was carrying my child. And you destroyed her because you couldn't stand that I chose someone you didn't pick." Eleanor stood, her voice rising to match his. "I destroyed nothing. I exposed her for what she was, an opportunist, a gold digger who saw your weakness and exploited it. She was building a $10 billion empire." Mark shouted. "She didn't need my money. She didn't need this family. She had more power in her little finger than you've ever had in your entire life, and you couldn't stand it. You couldn't stand that your son married someone who didn't need you." The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Eleanor's face went pale, then red, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for a response that would justify the unjustifiable. But there was nothing. No excuse. No defense. Just the ugly truth that she'd sabotaged her son's happiness because his wife's independence threatened her control. "Get out," Mark said quietly. "Get out of this house and don't come back." Eleanor's eyes widened. "You can't be serious." "Mark, I'm your mother. You're a stranger," Mark interrupted. "My mother would have wanted me to be happy. You just wanted me to be obedient. There's a difference. And I'm done pretending there isn't." Eleanor gathered her things with shaking hands, her composed mask finally cracking to reveal something desperate underneath. "You'll regret this," she whispered. "When that woman destroys everything we built, you'll come crawling back." "If she destroys it," Mark said flatly, "it's because we deserve it." Eleanor left without another word, and Mark felt nothing. No relief. No satisfaction. Just emptiness. Next came Lena. She was packing her things in the guest room when Mark walked in, the wedding invitation she'd printed months ago sitting on the dresser like evidence at a crime scene. "We're done," Mark said without preamble. Lena spun around, her face a mask of shock. "What?" "Mark, no, we can fix this." "We can fix what?" Mark's laugh was bitter. "The lies you told? The marriage you helped destroy? The baby you made me doubt?" He picked up the invitation and held it up. "You printed this before I even filed for divorce. You were planning our wedding while I was still married to Hannah. What kind of person does that?" Lena's eyes filled with calculated tears, the kind that had worked on him 100 times before. "I did it for us. I did it because I love you, and I knew she was wrong for you." "No," Mark said, his voice hard. "You did it because you wanted what she had. The name, the status, the money. But you were never going to get it, Lena. Because I was never the prize. Hannah was. And I threw her away for someone who saw me as a ladder to climb." Lena's tears stopped as fast as they'd started, her face hardening into something ugly. "You're pathetic," she hissed. "You had everything, and you're throwing it away for a woman who doesn't even want you anymore." "You're right," Mark said. "She doesn't want me. She doesn't need me. And that's exactly what makes her better than both of us." Lena grabbed her bags and stormed out, her heels clicking against the marble floors like gunshots. And then Mark was alone in a house that felt like a mausoleum, surrounded by wealth that meant nothing and memories that only brought pain. He thought about calling Hannah one more time, trying to explain, trying to apologize, trying to beg for a forgiveness he knew he didn't deserve. But what would he even say? I'm sorry I believed my mother over you. I'm sorry I threw water on you while you were pregnant. I'm sorry I rejected our child because I was too weak to see the truth. Words couldn't fix what he'd broken. Apologies couldn't undo what he'd done. Some mistakes are too big for redemption. Some sins are too deep for forgiveness. And Mark was finally understanding that he'd committed both. That night, he sat alone in the dark mansion that once symbolized everything he thought mattered. Power, prestige, family legacy. Now it just felt like a tomb. A monument to choices that destroyed the only real thing he'd ever had. And somewhere out there, 300 miles away in a safe house by the ocean, Hannah was sleeping peacefully with one hand on her growing belly, dreaming of a future that didn't include him. She wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. She wasn't thinking about him at all. And that, more than anything, was a final proof that Mark Renner had lost the only war that ever mattered. Because when a woman stops caring about the man who destroyed her, that man stops existing in any way that counts. He becomes a ghost in his own story. And Hannah had already moved on to a chapter where he didn't even deserve a footnote. Have you ever lost someone and realized too late that they were the best thing you'd never deserved? The annual shareholder meeting for Renner Industries was supposed to be a formality, a routine gathering where Mark would present quarterly reports and investors would nod politely before moving on with their lives. But the morning Mark walked into the auditorium, he knew immediately that nothing about this day would be routine. The room was packed beyond capacity, reporters lining the walls with cameras, investors whispering urgently into phones, board members avoiding his eyes. The air felt electric with anticipation, like everyone knew something he didn't, like they were all waiting for an execution. Mark's stomach twisted as he made his way to the front, his suit suddenly feeling too tight, his tie like a noose. Eleanor sat in the third row, her face pale but defiant, refusing to acknowledge the stares directed at her. Lena had somehow talked her way into the building and was sitting near the back, her expression a mixture of fear and desperation. And Mark stood at the podium feeling like a man about to be sentenced, which in a way, he was. The lights dimmed without warning, and Mark's opening remarks died in his throat. A massive screen behind him flickered to life, and the room went silent so fast you could hear hearts beating. Then Hannah's face appeared, filling the screen with such commanding presence that Mark's knees nearly buckled. She looked radiant, powerful, untouchable. Every inch the titan she'd become while he'd been busy destroying his own life. She wore a navy suit that somehow made her pregnancy look like a crown instead of a vulnerability. Her hair styled in soft waves that framed a face that had never looked more beautiful or more dangerous. Good morning. Hannah's voice came through the speakers, calm and clear as glass. My name is Hannah Caldwell, and I'm addressing this meeting today as the new majority holder of Renner Industries corporate debt. The room exploded into gasps and murmurs. Mark felt the floor tilt beneath him, his vision tunneling as he grabbed the podium to keep from falling. Eleanor shot to her feet, her face twisted in horror. Lena's mouth dropped open, her carefully maintained composure shattering like porcelain hitting concrete. Hannah continued as if she couldn't hear the chaos, her expression serene. Over the past 3 weeks, through a series of legal and transparent financial acquisitions, I have obtained controlling interest in the debt that currently burdens Renner Industries. This means that I now hold significant influence over the company's financial future and operational decisions. Mark couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. This wasn't just defeat, this was obliteration. The woman he'd humiliated now literally controlled everything his family had built for 3 generations. I want to be clear about my intentions, Hannah said, and the room went silent again, every person hanging on her next words. I did not pursue this acquisition out of revenge, though I would have every right to. I pursued it because I believe in accountability. Because I believe that people who abuse power should face consequences. And because I want to ensure that what happened to me never happens to another woman in this company or any company connected to it. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. But before we discuss the future, I think it's important to discuss the past. Specifically, the coordinated campaign of lies, manipulation, and emotional abuse that led to the destruction of my marriage and the humiliation I endured at the hands of Mark Renner, Eleanor Renner, and Lena Holloway. The screen split, showing Hannah on one side and on the other, a slideshow of evidence. Text messages between Eleanor and Lena, forged photos, bank transfers, timestamps, everything. Each piece of evidence appeared with clinical precision, each one more damning than the last. The room watched in stunned silence as the entire conspiracy unfolded in undeniable detail. These women, Hannah said, her voice never rising but somehow filling every corner of the auditorium, systematically destroyed my reputation, poisoned my husband against me, and made me doubt my own sanity. They fabricated evidence of infidelity. They manipulated financial records. They bribed staff members to lie. And they did all of this not because I had done anything wrong, but because I represented something they couldn't control, a woman who didn't need their approval or their money to be powerful. Eleanor tried to stand, tried to say something, but a board member physically pulled her back down into her seat. Lena was crying, her mascara running in black streams down her face, but no one was looking at her with sympathy. They were looking at her like she was exactly what Hannah had proven her to be, a liar, a manipulator, a fraud. Mark Renner, Hannah continued, and Mark felt every eye in the room turn toward him like weapons, had a choice. He could have trusted his wife. He could have investigated the accusations. He could have chosen love over suspicion. Instead, he chose the easy path, believing the worst about me because it required less courage than standing up to his mother. And in doing so, he didn't just destroy our marriage. He destroyed his own integrity. The screen changed again, showing the security footage that had already gone viral. Mark throwing dirty water on Hannah, her walking away with dignity intact, while he stood there looking exactly like what he was, a man who had chosen cruelty over character. I could destroy this company, Hannah said, her voice soft but absolute. I could call the debt, force bankruptcy, scatter your investors, and walk away while everything the Renner family built crumbles to dust. And legally, I would be within my rights. The room held its collective breath. Mark closed his eyes, waiting for the axe to fall. But I won't, Hannah continued, and Mark's eyes snapped open. I won't because destroying this company would hurt innocent people, employees who depend on their paychecks, families who rely on these jobs, communities that benefit from the work done here. I won't punish them for the sins of 3 people. Relief started to wash through the room until Hannah's next words cut it short. However, I will implement changes. Effective immediately, Mark Renner will step down as CEO. Eleanor Renner will be removed from all advisory positions and barred from any decision-making role within this company. And Lena Holloway will find that every business connection she thought she had in this industry has suddenly become unavailable. The screen showed legal documents already filed, already processed, already executed. Hannah had done in 3 weeks what most people couldn't do in 3 years. The company will be restructured under new leadership, Hannah said. Leadership that values integrity, that protects its employees, that doesn't tolerate abuse of power in any form. I will maintain my controlling interest to ensure these changes are implemented and sustained. But I will not be involved in day-to-day operations because I have my own empire to build. The investors started nodding, some even applauding quietly. They didn't care about Mark's humiliation, they cared about their money. And Hannah had just proven she could protect it better than he ever could. To every woman watching this, Hannah said, her voice finally carrying a hint of emotion, who has been silenced, dismissed, accused, or destroyed by people who should have protected you. This victory is not just mine. It is ours. Because they can take our dignity temporarily. They can damage our reputations. They can make us doubt ourselves. But they cannot take our power unless we give it to them. And I stopped giving them power the moment I walked away. She placed one hand on her belly in a gesture so maternal and powerful it made every woman in the room sit up straighter. I am building a life for my daughter that doesn't include apologies for my strength. I am building a future where she never has to shrink to make insecure people comfortable. And I am building a legacy that proves the biggest mistake anyone can make is underestimating a woman who knows her worth. The screen went dark. The room erupted into applause so loud it shook the walls. Investors stood, board members clapped. Reporters scrambled to capture every moment. But Mark just stood there at the podium, broken, watching his life's work slip through his fingers into the hands of the woman he'd thrown away like trash. Eleanor sat frozen in her seat, her face ashen, her empire reduced to ash in less than an hour. Lena was already trying to slip out the back, but security stopped her, not to arrest her, but because the reporters outside wanted statements, wanted explanations, wanted to see the woman who'd helped destroy a marriage face the consequences of her actions. And somewhere 300 miles away, in a beautiful office overlooking the ocean, Hannah turned off the video feed and smiled. Not with bitterness or triumph, but with peace. She'd done what she needed to do, said what needed to be said, protected what needed protecting. Now she could finally move forward without the weight of their betrayal holding her back. Davidson walked in, grinning ear to ear. That was the most powerful corporate takedown I've seen in 30 years, he said. How do you feel? Hannah stood, walking to the window where waves crashed against rocks below, constant and unstoppable. I feel free, she said simply. For the first time in years, I feel completely free. That evening, Mark sat alone in the house that no longer felt like his, staring at a picture of Hannah from their wedding day. She was laughing in the photo, her eyes bright with hope and love and trust he'd obliterated. He picked up his phone, typed out one final message, even though he knew it wouldn't go through. I'm sorry. Not because I want forgiveness, but because you deserved so much better than what I gave you. You always did. The message bounced back undelivered. Hannah had moved on to a life where he didn't exist, except as a cautionary tale, a lesson, a chapter she'd already closed. And Mark realized with crushing finality that this was exactly what he deserved. Not a second chance. Not redemption. Just the slow, painful understanding that he'd held a diamond and treated it like dirt. Eleanor lost everything. Her social standing, her influence, her connections. She became the villain in every story. The warning mothers gave their sons about toxic family dynamics. Lena's foundation collapsed, her reputation destroyed, her future reduced to nothing but the stain of her choices. And Mark became a ghost in his own life, running a company he no longer controlled, living in a house that felt like a prison, carrying the weight of knowing he'd destroyed the only real love he'd ever had. But Hannah? Hannah thrived. 6 months later, she gave birth to a healthy baby girl she named Grace, because Grace was the gift she'd given herself when she walked away from people who didn't deserve her. She raised her daughter in a home filled with love, respect, and the kind of strength that comes from surviving storms and choosing to dance in the rain anyway. She built schools, funded programs for women escaping abuse, became the kind of leader who changed industries and lives. And she never looked back. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming so successful, so powerful, so completely untouchable that the people who tried to break you realize too late that they didn't break anything. They just freed you to become everything they were too small to imagine. Hannah didn't just survive. She conquered. And the world would never forget the woman who turned humiliation into elevation and pain into power. What would you do if you held the power to destroy everyone who hurt you? Thanks for watching, and make sure to subscribe to my channel. Also drop a comment telling us the part of the story you enjoyed most.